Hello and welcome to Regionally Speaking and this series entitled Stewards of Social Justice, when we'll be spotlighting faculty, staff, and students of Case Western Reserve University who are actively engaged in the advancement of the university-wide Social Justice Institute. Today we are talking with Sana Loue, JD, PhD, MPH, MSSA, Professor and Director of the Center for Minority Public Health at Case Western Reserve University, School of Medicine, and Department of Epidemiology. Now, I just gave you all those initials, but she's going to tell you in a moment what they all stand for. Her areas of expertise include HIV risk, family violence, mental illness, research ethics, and forensic epidemiology. She is the author or editor of more than 25 books and more than 75 peer-reviewed manuscripts. Sana Loue, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is great.
Well, I'd like us to begin with some personal history about your educational background and what drew you into the world of medicine and the areas that led to your primary areas of research, of teaching and scholarship, including HIV risk, family violence, mental illness, research ethics, and forensic epidemiology. And I've been practicing that last one, epidemiology. Yes, I have. Please go ahead.
Where would you like me to start?
Well, I'd like you to tell us about some of your background and what led you into this in your educational background. But you do need to tell our audience what all of those initials stand for. Start with JD. All right.
That's probably the easy part.
All right, very good.
The JD is a law degree, and I practiced law for 14 years, primarily immigration law and AIDS-related law. The PhD, I actually have two PhDs. One is in epidemiology from UCLA, and one is from medical anthropology here at Case, since faculty have great tuition benefits. The MPH is a Master's of Public Health, which I got before both of the PhDs. The MSSA is a graduate degree, it's a master's level degree in social work. I'm also a licensed social worker. And I also have a master's degree in secondary education, and I'm an ordained interfaith minister. So that's sort of the educational background. And I think what many people would never believe is that I actually hated school until I got to graduate school. I did not like school and dropped out of college after my first year and decided to work, and then figured out while I was working that unless I got advanced degrees, I was never going to be able to do what I wanted to do in the world, and went back to school.
That's a great story.
Yeah, it's a true story.
Well, I believe it's a true story, yeah. But thank you for telling us about it, because that's the way it can work sometimes.
It is. It is. I think, I think everyone has a different path, and for me, it was a good path. It was a good way to figure out what I wanted to do and what the best vehicle was to do it.
Very good. I'm interested in experiential education myself, and I'm interested in what kinds of experience you had that then advanced your own the direction in which you moved.
Well, I'm very much a child of the 60s,
yes,
as my former department chair would say. He
yes.
said, "You're so much a child of the 60s." And one of the things that was very important to me in my education was that it allowed me to do the kind of work in the world that I wanted to do. And at the time when I first went to college, there were lots of requirements for all kinds of courses that I thought, these are not relevant to my life. And they really weren't relevant to my life, which is why I said I didn't like school and I wanted to drop out. But then I figured out that without the piece of paper, it didn't matter what I wanted to do in life. It wasn't going to happen. So if, for those of your listeners who lived through the 60s, I mean, that was the era of the civil rights movement, to some degree the beginning of the feminist movement, Certainly in the early 70s, we were arguing for the Equal Rights Amendment for women. It was the Vietnam War. Even before that, when I was growing up, when I was 8 years old, a woman that I knew bled to death on the street from an illegal abortion. And the father of a friend of mine was imprisoned for performing an abortion, which at the time was illegal. So there were many, many circumstances even before that. And then when I was in college, originally I went to college in New York City and then moved down to Florida, where I was able to get a very nice scholarship based on academic performance. I moved down in the mid-'70s when the Klan was still quite strong. And there were cross burnings and marches where people literally lined the streets in their hoods and guns. And it was the era of Anita Bryant and efforts to eliminate all gays from the public school system throughout the state of Florida. So all of that really propelled me. I had been interested anyway in social work and worked in social work for a short while after getting my undergraduate degree, but then decided I really needed to go to law school and practice law, and then decided I could, while I was practicing law, the AIDS epidemic came into being, and more of my clients became presented with medical problems, and they couldn't get care for their medical problems because they were in the country illegally, but they couldn't get legal status because of their medical problems. So it became very clear to me that I had to find another way of working with the same communities to continually to be of more help. So that's sort of the long story.
Mm-hmm. And your undergraduate school and your law school, how did you make those choices of where you went to college and your undergraduate and then the law school?
It was really more, I would say for undergraduate, it was more sort of serendipitous. My initial year was at Fordham University. I was admitted through the early admission process with advanced placement credits. And I was very unhappy there and dropped out after the first year. And then I worked full-time as a legal secretary during the day and went to paralegal school at night. And then the next year, I decided, well, gee, I really needed that piece of paper, whether I wanted it or not. And Brooklyn College was starting, that was the first year that they had started an adult program in the evening for adults wanting to go back to college. And at the time, I think I was still underage for their minimal age, but by that time I had switched jobs and was working for a law firm. And the lawyer called them up and advised them that it probably wasn't in their best interest to deny admission on the basis of age. And I was admitted. And I went to Brooklyn College for a year and then was able to get a scholarship from the University of West Florida. And so I went there. And so I moved to Florida.
The career path in terms of education is always interesting to me.
It is. And what I think is fascinating for me to look back at my own career path is that if I hadn't made those moves, I never would have learned about life the way I learned about life. Mm-hmm. And that has been absolutely invaluable because it's allowed me to work with different communities. When I was in Florida, I worked with juveniles for a while. I worked with, at that time, the Vietnamese boat people were coming into the United States, and I was able to work with them. I taught English as a second language. So it was a wonderful, very rich experience.
Uh-huh. So all along the way, you were being educated in a formal sense, as we would say, but you were also having the experience that was with the people you wanted to serve.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Absolutely. I was amazingly fortunate.
Amazingly fortunate, and I think you must have been extremely capable in that. It sounds to me as though you had a lot of scholarship support along the way.
I did. I did through law school. I did through my PhD. actually through all of my education. I've been incredibly lucky.
Well, that's a recognition that comes about in the way you have already demonstrated what you could do, and I think it's a wonderful story, and I'm very very glad that you shared it with us. We're going to be talking a little bit later about the social justice. Your work in terms of social justice in what we're doing at CASE and the Social Justice Institute, but perhaps we could lead into that with having you draw upon those experiences that you've just described for what followed then in terms of your work. Could you do that?
Sure. In terms of how I got here? Or,
Yeah.
Well, it became, as I mentioned, it became very clear to me that both for my own happiness and to be able to really work effectively with the communities I had been working with as a social worker, as an attorney, that it was important to find another vehicle. I think ultimately whatever discipline we're in is really just the vehicle that allows us to relate to the rest of the world in the way that we're most comfortable relating to the world. And that can change over time. And that's really why I decided to pursue the PhDs and ultimately to come to CASE, where I can do the work that I love and work with communities.
And how long have you been at CASE?
It will be 18 years this coming February. It's a long time.
It's a long time.
Very long time.
Well, that also accounts for the breadth in terms of what you have done. That your educational background has, and this is my view, had a lot to do with what you then were able to do in terms of what happened here. That's a long period of time.
It's a long period of time. I think it's not just the educational background, though. I think much of it has been my interaction with communities. I think if you really connect with people, it gives you a different sense of how to do things and how to move in the world and how to maybe integrate everything.
Well, we're going to take a break now, and then we'll be right back. But that's the story that I want you to tell us about. Okay? Thank you. We'll be right back.